Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kish.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
So, Marcus, we were talking about pain levels the other day. And I don't mean the pain of interviewing any of our guests. Of course, all of them are amazing. But I understand you've been working on increasing your tolerance for pain. Is that true?
No, I have a very particular pain threshold, I guess, which it's maybe too much telling you about my personal life, even though it doesn't. No, I'm not. I'm just removing a tattoo. I took some of my piercings out.
Right.
That,
So
it's
you're
removing
lightening
pain.
you're lightening your life. You're lightening your load. You're becoming a freer spirit. Is that it?
I think not just through COVID and other things. I think there's maybe a bit of a mind shift, and the mind shift comes with superficial amendments to myself, as probably symbolic more than anything. But in my head,
But
it
I,
makes
but
sense.
I think what you're really trying to do is you're trying to supercharge yourself.
Oh Lord.
And on that note, Marcus, who's on the show today?
Well, today on our show we have Pam Hamilton and her book Supercharged Teams, and therefore the award of the worst segue and lamest joke ever goes to Mr. Troy Norcross, farm boy from
Huzzah!
Missouri.
Huzzah!
Welcome. Put it in your shelf.
Marcus, what were your takeaways today?
So our main takeaways today was about time and teams spending a little bit of time, essential time, not nice to have time, on actually getting to know each other. So one of the things Pam said is like, people who come together and have a couple of meetings are not teams. People who get to know each other, build trust, talk about something that is not work related, that builds teams. And the other thing is also to build teams. When you talk to each other, communicate often, stepping back for 5 minutes when someone sends an email that might be stressed out. It's absolutely valuable to, step a little bit back, have a look at the situation. Don't take it personal, but also actually be able to emphasize, because empathy doesn't necessarily come easy with everyone. I'm sure it doesn't come easy with me. I sometimes slip, and but that's the moments that are actually team building, where you really step back, take time, look at it, communicate better, or spend time on talking about something that's not directly work related, but understanding actually who your team members are, who your colleagues are, who these people are, who have families, kids, all sorts of things going on in their life, more than ever through COVID, whatever, you know. Knowing a bit about that, spending time a little bit on that. I know it sounds, obvious, but super important, actually essential, not a nice to have. And before I hand over to you, I have to say there was one thing that I've now told a couple of people where I was listening to General McChrystal's podcast, and if you're listening, General McChrystal, we want to have you on our show to talk about Team of Teams. But he had someone from a pharma company on his podcast asking, what was the biggest lesson you learned through COVID times and going through this hard battle of getting used to a new environment, to a new world? And that executive said, well, I learned that actually people have families and personal lives that are quite troublesome. And that told me a lot about looking at people differently. And that being a nice notion, I was like, okay, you're an executive. You should know this stuff. You should know that your people are actual people who have more to do than just work for you. So if that's what someone tells me, I'm like, you need to educate yourself very quickly and you need to do way better, because yes, people who work in an organization are human beings. Can we please remember that? So taking time for that, to build trust and do the human being thing, super essential. And unfortunately, I would say I haven't seen enough organizations do that. and I want more people to do so. And Pam makes a really good case for that. That's my insight.
Great. I think she was also talking a bit about kind of understanding how to engage with teams, understanding boundaries, rules, cultural differences. And that's, again, as you say, taking the time to really get to know the people that you're dealing with and not just their function and their role. The other thing I found really interesting, she was saying the old model of leadership, of command and control, kind of managing down, is very passe and very broken. And we referenced the David Marquet book, Turn the Ship Around, and the big shift in leadership that's actually happening.
Yeah.
But the real insightful thing for me was when she said, yes, but the other way is equally true. You can't any longer, as a team, use the excuse, well, I've got a bad leader, as to why you're unhappy and why you're not achieving things. And then she discussed various ways of trying to, manage up and to sell up and to impact your leaders in a way to have the results as a team that you want to have. So those were my takeaways. But you know what? Enough of you and me and my horribly bad segues. Should we go talk to Pam?
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, wickedpodcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello everyone, today we're here with Pam Hamilton. Hello Pam, and thank you for joining us.
Hi Troy, hi Marcus, nice to see you. Thanks a lot for having me.
As usual, we're starting at the top, so please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
So I'm Pam Hamilton, I'm the author of Supercharged Teams. This is a book that's called 30 Tools of Great Teamwork, but basically I wrote the book because work has changed. I think we've all noticed, haven't we? We've got more information, fewer resources, faster expectations, but it kind of feels like we think that the best way to deal with that is just put down our heads and work faster and work harder. And, there are better ways to do it. So it's all about resetting the way we work for the better.
Lovely.
So, go on, Marcus.
So I just wanted to dig right straight into more of the title. So Supercharge, that's a big word. That's a scary word. There's no pressure there. So tell us a bit more about what Supercharge means, because there's teams, there's agile teams, there's fast teams, there's cross-disciplinary teams. What are Supercharged teams?
So supercharged teams are simply teams that perform at their best potential. So performing at the highest level you can. Now, that might sound a bit terrifying, but it's intended to feel like it's something very positive. All of us are in lots of teams, right? We work in teams at work. We sometimes might volunteer in a team in a charity. We might be in different kinds of teams in our lives, but the best teams are the ones who use each other's energy and time in the best possible way. So that's all supercharging is, going above average and being the best you can be. And if you do that, not only can you do better work, but you also enjoy the work more. So that's what supercharging is.
All right. So I'm going to jump right into kind of the harder, more difficult kind of questions.
Go.
Tell me what you do when you've got different levels of energy and team members, within a team. We've talked to a lot of different authors, talked about a lot of different teams, kind of things. And some people, they're just coming to work because they need the money to get to the weekend. And other people are like, oh my gosh, as long as we don't wait too long, we can change the world. How do you deal with this different levels of energy within a team, regardless of whether it's a task force or whether it's a sprint team or whether it's an agile team?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think you're right to be realistic. We aren't all there at work to change the world. Some people have, much more enthusiasm for certain topics, for certain projects. Some people just want to get in and get out and get the job done. I recognize that. I guess part of it is actually having a conversation about who the team is and what the team wants from it. So, I might be there just to make sure that I get my job done and maybe I get home on time to my family. Somebody else might be there because they want to learn about the topic and perhaps get a promotion next year. One of the things that I talk about is being able to have the conversation with each other to say, why are you here, in a non-confrontational way, in an encouraging way, to really uncover what motivates each of the different team members. And if I know that, one of my team members really just wants to be able to leave on time because they've got other responsibilities, that's awesome, because then I know how to work with them a little bit better. And I think possibly what we've been doing in the past is, either ignoring that some people are different or don't want to work in certain ways, or hoping for the best. If I act like this, then everyone will come along with me. What I'm saying is, let's think about and talk about how we want to work together. Some of the team members that I work with, for example, are real introverts. They don't want to be in a workshop, having some massive brainstorm and talking out loud for 8 hours. That's like their idea of hell, right? But how would I know that unless we'd had the conversation? How do you like to work? For example, one member of my team really likes to be able to consider things. So I will never phone her up and go, what do you think of this? I'll send something in advance. I know that she wants to think about it. She'll come back. So having the permission to ask each other those kinds of preferences and questions.
So that gets me a little bit into someone mentioned sort of setting ground rules, which is, I think, it's a great statement, because I think it's probably one of the most overlooked things. I've been joining plenty of teams and programs and efforts, and onboarding is sort of one of these overlooked children often in organizations, and not just onboarding itself, but onboarding into a project where you join a new team. You maybe get a brief and a scope if you're lucky, and then you sort of dive straight in, and no one ever asks what you just said. And it's the same with, I remember doing a little survey just when COVID started about new ways of working or working from home. And one of the things people stated was, my boss doesn't respect the 9 to 5. Everything's blocked out now, and I think we know the statistics now, 10-15% more meetings, less work being able to be done, and I have to take care of my kids at home. Where are these blocks that I actually have time and I can put down my head and just work, and others are okay for meetings, and no one ever talks about it. In your ground rules scope, sort of tell us a bit more about how you can approach to set it, or when, for example, to do it, when to take the time, because it seems to be, you go in there and a week later or 2 weeks later, it's too late. You're already in the middle of it, and you already have a full backlog. When and how do you set those things up best?
Well, that you've hit upon one of the most important issues, which is that we're creatures of habit. We get stuck into habits really quickly, and especially if you're a new person in an old team and the team has been doing things in a certain way, it's incredibly difficult to change how they behave, right? Ground rules are like boundaries, and in any good relationship, over time, you have to communicate a little bit about what is and isn't acceptable for the other person. Even if it feels right for you, for the other person, it might not feel right. And rules of engagement, or ground rules, are something that I would encourage teams to consider at any point, and especially when a new member joins, at any point, to discuss why certain ground rules might be in existence already. By the way, this is assuming people have them, because most teams don't. Most teams have just sort of worked ahead and decided how they work just based on their habits. But if you are joining a team, to set those ground rules and explain why. So, for example, we tend to try and be on time to meetings. We tend to try and have our cameras on if we meet, rather than have our cameras off. Why is that? Well, because we're working remotely, so we want to make sure that we are, connecting in the most human way possible. Or whatever ground rules you set. Quite a lot of the ground rules, actually, that I hear people setting are in terms of language. Certain language that we do like to use, certain language that we don't like to use. How to intervene when somebody has said something that's difficult and you'd like to say that you don't feel good about it. But really, the opportunity is there for at any time in any team to be conscious of those ground rules. Have you set them? And in which case, a new member of the team coming in should understand why they've been set. Haven't you set them? Well, then you ought to think about what the best ground rules are. You mentioned already, meetings. Before COVID, there was a piece of research that was done just before COVID that said that we are using up, the average office worker is using up 44% of their time in meetings and emails in the week, which means we all just start working in our job on a Wednesday, right? And that's not necessarily our right work. And we all know that there are many meetings that we have to join which are not necessarily the best use of our time. So we've got to be really careful and conscious about how we use our time and our energy and each other's attention. And that's why ground rules are important. So yeah, I'm afraid that the easy/difficult answer is you should do it. You should be looking at ground rules immediately as people join the team. And if you haven't got them already, you should have the conversation about it.
So as a small kind of add-on to that, my primary client is in Sweden. My primary development team is in Poland. I have some offshore people in India. So ground rules are not just between people. Sometimes they're unspoken cultural ground rules. How do you kind of surface cultural differences and create cultural understanding? Because they're not even ground rules. They're built in.
Absolutely. They are so instinctive, aren't they? And as much as you get told, or you can read a book about how people in Sweden have a certain kind of a culture, or how people in India have a certain kind of a culture, it doesn't help the way that you feel, right? I mean, I think I come back to, to understanding each other and to talking. So my team, and this happens with a lot of the people that I work with, we work a lot remotely. We always have done. And what we've done is we've given each other permission and acceptance to give each other immediate feedback or question each other rather than waiting and hoping for it to get better. And even on the smallest possible things, if somebody says something that doesn't sound right, or it sounds a bit off, or if somebody does something that really wasn't what you asked for, giving each other permission and showing by example to say, hey, that wasn't really what I asked for. Or, are you okay? Because the email that you sent sounded a bit, you sounded a bit frustrated. Is everything all right? So over communicating is one of the things that we have to do in any good team, but especially in teams that are working remotely. In my chapter about conflict and dealing with teams in conflict, which is, relatively common, I interviewed a conflict resolution expert. She's a mediator who goes into teams that are really toxic and are having terrible times with people off sick or being, taken to tribunals, really big problems. And she said that the number one reason why teams get into conflict in the first place is someone sending an email in the middle of the night that had the wrong tone, whether that was the wrong tone intentionally or unintentionally. But the reason why that goes wrong is instead of the person in the morning going, oh, are you okay? We sit there and we worry about it, or we get frustrated about it, or we gossip about it, or we have to be a part of the solution. So it is a practice rather than something that can just be a switch that gets flipped. But if you talk about it, it's something that, the team gets used to. I mean, in multicultural teams often, and the collective intelligence research proves this, one of the main issues that gets in the way of collective intelligence with multicultural teams is politeness. Now, I'm all about politeness. I'm all about, definitely we need to be polite with each other, respectful with each other, encouraging of each other. However, what you have to do is set up mechanisms for constructive conflict or challenge. And that could be as simple. So one of the senior teams that I've worked with recently, it could be as simple as agreeing on a phrase. So the phrase could be, in the spirit of constructive challenge, may I ask this, which gives people a way to ask it. Or even just, how can we? Because, if I'm to go to my boss and say, I think you shouldn't be emailing me that stuff in the middle of the night, or I think you shouldn't be phoning me at 9 o'clock in the night, that's one way of saying it. Or it could be, go to the boss and say, how can we make sure that we let people who are working in different time zones not be on call 24/7, just reframing it in a way that everybody understands it's a kind of a safe way in to constructive conflict.
So I am quick follow-up, and then I'm going to hand back over to Marcus. I also, in my own life, try to use the reverse, which is I try to open the door. And I'm like, what advice would you like to give me? And I may do that once a quarter. I may do that once a month. I may find a particular situation where I know there's some tension. And I read another interesting phrase that the difference between asking for feedback and asking for advice, or delivering feedback versus delivering advice, can be really transformational. feedback can be, oh, you just want some feedback? Well, I'll give you some fluffy, interesting, useless stuff.
Oh, I've got a list here.
Or advice, what you should do differently in tangible, actionable ways. So do you think it's also useful to sometimes open yourself up to invite it?
Oh, I love the word advice, Troy. I just think you're absolutely right on that. And in fact, that's another way of reframing those kinds of questions. I'm having to reframe an issue to your boss or to your coworker. I'm having a real problem making sure that my tone is understood. What advice would you give me? I totally agree with you, but you're right to invite it. But this is all about inviting those conversations. The problem is that when we're working like we are now, as you said, we've got many more meetings. We're back to back. We're transactional because we're not following each other into a meeting room or walking down the road together or, at the coffee machine because many of us are still working remotely. The problem is then you don't have those downtimes to share a little bit of trust and information. And, you're not opening you don't have any time to open the conversation about how people are. And so your trust, is diminishing. And that the problem with the way that we're working now is we absolutely have to open up the chances to have unstructured conversations, have those water cooler moments, even if it is, lots of my clients now are doing a lunchtime Zoom session on a Friday where it's called a no agenda, or it's called lunch. And you're just meeting with absolutely nothing just to say hi, because otherwise we're not building that trust and that communication, which does help us in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's just at least three things right there. And this is even more important. It really resonates with me because even more important, like in change and transformation project, which sort of most of the projects I'm in, where you have a brand new team, people who don't know each other, you have no trust base at all, apart from everyone having an open mindset and going in and being used to the fact that, well, you have to trust. You have to start with a big level of trust. Otherwise, you're lost from the get-go. And what you're saying as well, we did that on some of the big transformation projects as well, where at the end of the week in the team, you come together and it's not about any issues, tasks, or anything. It's just about how you're feeling. Do you feel you have everything you have? Is there anything else going on? And we would even potentially, to some extent, talk about, personal things and how, you're still confident in that, to whatever level people were wanting to share, but, just to really make sure, are you actually feeling okay? And I definitely recognize that as super important. And interestingly, I'm starting to transform that even more into teams I meet who've been together for a longer time, because sometimes you see the need for them as well. You would think like, oh, only in a highly volatile environment you need this, but no, actually, it's a really good standard practice to do in any team. So the other thing I wanted to ask, and therefore, because we talked about both trust and availability of time, right? Especially during COVID times, everything is even more high pressure for, let's call it normal teams, standard established teams in an established environment. Everything changed. I appreciate things where you go, you don't just react, you take your time to maybe reflect a bit and consider and be empathetic and say, instead of going at someone, if someone comes the wrong way, your way, but take that 5-minute step away and you say, well, often you don't have the time. Is there a way of dealing with it without having the time? Or would you always say, you know what, no, take the time to step back because it's just needed? Like really earmark that time, sleep over it and then reply in the email, all sorts of things, right? Don't just react. Is this something you would actually propose to fit into an everyday business as usual process to really say, look, this half an hour of the day, I'm actually not working on anything. That's my step back time. That's my assessment time. That's my, looking at it from a different perspective and not just a personal, emotional one.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. So, first of all, just to complete that thought, Netflix say that teams shouldn't be like families. We all know like a family, slightly dysfunctional family. We all know each other. We've all worked together for a while. Don't worry, I'll make an excuse for him. He's always like that. Don't worry, she does this. Families don't necessarily kind of, always get better or correct themselves. Teams are not like families. Teams are like sports teams. None of us want to be a great player on a bad team. We all want to be a great player on a great team. So we have to stop treating ourselves like families and start treating ourselves like sports teams. Sports teams, what they do is they practice. They don't just get on the field and play the game. They spend time together practicing. And I would argue that time that you spend building your trust in your relationships and the understanding of each other's purpose and motivation is team training. It's not wasted time. And I think the problem is because we're so busy, we've taken that to mean, oh, it's nice to have. But it's not just nice to have. If you have that team time, if you invest in it up front, like training, that will save you time later. Because the things that come later when you haven't done that are the misunderstandings, the inefficiencies, and the problems. Back to your point about time. Listen, the most popular chapter and the most popular tools is chapter 3, which is all about taking back control of time. Because basically, I know this is an obvious thing I'm going to say, but I don't think any of us realize it enough. To be a great team person, to be in a great team, you have to have time to be in that team. You can't just join multiple teams and have no time. And one of the big things that I laugh about it, but I think we can all recognize it, me included, is being in a team is not being in the same meeting once a week. That's not a team, that's a meeting. You can't just attend the same meeting and say that you're a team. Or being in a team is not sitting in the same room as each other or being in the same department or having the same job title. That's not a team. A team is a group of people who do something together, who achieve, who have a goal with a time period in which they're going to achieve something together. The only way that we can do that effectively now is to, first of all, start by taking back time from emails, because we spend an inordinate amount of time doing crap email hygiene. And I've got a couple of different ideas about that. Taking back time from badly run meetings by reducing the amount of time you spend in meetings. So, and not to save that time so that you can do more meetings and emails, but to save that time for exactly what you were saying, the reflection, the quality thinking, the attention, the connection, and the communication. That's where we need to spend the time, not in sitting in yet another meeting where someone's going through 20 slides and we're pretending to listen, but we're on our emails. The way that we work now is quite crazy, really. It's a bad use of our attention. It's a bad use of our intelligence.
So I was talking to a recruiter friend of mine today. And I'm assuming the recruitment business is quite busy because there's a lot of people that are really trying to hire and it's really difficult. And he works in the ad tech, martech kind of agency space. And he says, we're really, really having trouble getting people to come back because there's no hangout. There's no kind of group interaction. And I don't mean all kind of sitting around in a circle and agreeing on things and singing kumbaya, which is one thing that consensus leadership and management can indeed do. But there's no time for them to kind of go out and do the pub crawls and build those relationships. So what do businesses and leaders do to kind of create that synergy that's even beyond the team?
Yeah, isn't that the reason why we love to be in a great team? Yes, we do great work together. Yes, we're professionals, but actually it feels good too. And that's all about the people. Yes, it might also be about what you're achieving, but it's not anything without the people and that feeling of doing something together. That's how we work. That's what we love. And we know the research says we work better together than we do as individuals. I just think it's about making sure that you do look at how your team is spending time and prioritize that downtime together, that connection time together, whatever it may be. We started something in lockdown, which was in our team just presenting to each other our different hobbies, our just personal hobbies. But actually what that has become, and in fact, several different clients of ours are now using that as a means of giving each other the chance to inspire the rest of the team members with something that they feel passionate about. It could be a hobby, but actually many hobbies right now or pieces of interest that you are looking at in your personal life are fascinating for the purposes of work. And so even just giving people different inspiration topics to prepare and give each other that richness, that is a structured way of making things feel inspiring, letting people learn from each other. The other thing, so one of our clients, Ipsos, what they've done is they've done a coffee roulette. So they're a company based in the UK, even though they're global, but the UK company has, I think it's about 3,000 people. And what they've done is they've just done a random thing where you have to meet someone random from the rest of the business once for coffee every month for half an hour. that people need connection. They need humans. They need to meet people, learn from people, respect people, understand each other. So you do have to provide time for that, and you do have to provide mechanisms for that. And maybe unstructured ways of doing that won't happen because the pressures get in the way. So you might need to give it a name like Coffee Roulette, or give it a reason like, Marcus, what's your inspiration that you're going to present next week? It could be on anything. And even
Like
that,
skateboards.
exactly. Well, I used to work in TV, and mine was celebrity gossip. Why not? But whatever it is that you're already passionate about, that other people can learn, put something new in their heads, lets them learn about you. Those are important things, and we do need to do those. These are not just nice to have.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were lucky to have Tom Peters around in one of our first episodes. Who's it's now as he nearly told me through his assistant retired, and he's done his stuff, and good on him. But he was very blunt and clear about those kind of things. He said, managers or people shouldn't be measured by how many tasks they do, but how many people they go on lunch with during the week to actually get to know the company and understand what's going on here, just to integrate themselves and get other views and understand everything better. And it's a
And
great,
that makes
great,
you get
great
better at your
measurement.
job as well, doesn't it?
It is and I'm looking at this now, and I think I'm just about to get back into some offices on the current project I just started on Monday, and it will be the first time I actually went back to some physical place. So over the last 2 years, there was little to nothing, and it showed a lot in the dynamics. Even I think at least one of the companies had sort of a Friday Zoom in, and exactly what you said. You don't talk about anything; you talk about everything. That's it. But I want to ask. I want to ask then something about outside of leadership, because I've seen, I would say, easily over the last 2 years, nearly every project I've been in, that leadership was seemingly quite a bit at a loss of really what to do, and often it was about just driving things faster rather than actually turning it around. And we are in the middle of a mental health crisis or mental health wave, to really more look after your people, which is quite heartbreaking at times. But therefore, I'm asking, as a leader, can you actually set up that teams are run like that, or that teams are giving time like that? Do you lead by example, or do you do principles, or what sort of some of your experiences and stories you have where leaders helped say that that's okay? Because in a lot of contexts I've seen, it didn't feel okay for the team to ever do this such things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, um, sometimes it feels like we're running teams like it was 200 or 300 years ago, right? With someone who's the boss, and then everybody else does what the boss says. And really, that isn't the way that successful teams run. And that's just a fact. We don't have time anymore for command and control, and leaders cannot be the experts in every single piece of technology or knowledge and information and data that their teams can be experts in. So really, leaders need to relax their command and control and raise their leadership and values to checking whether the team are okay and to facilitating the team's progress. So one of the people, Stefan Homeister, who I interviewed for the book, he's a leadership expert, and he was just saying that a lot of the work that he's doing with leaders now is about allowing them to use that word that you had earlier, which was, allowing them to ask him for advice rather than ask him for the answer. Allow them to ask him, asking a team, what's getting in your way? Where can I help? Rather than having to know what the answer is that the team or the solution the team is building. So, allowing leaders to relax and not know what's going on necessarily in the everyday of the project, but to work out what the barriers are, what the opportunities are. And the several pieces of research that went into the book were done by McKinsey on the power of managing stakeholders, managing peers, and managing leaders. And I just don't think we do that enough. Loads and loads of books are all about how leaders manage down, but really this is about allowing teams or empowering teams to manage up and to manage sideways. And the same with leaders. The best thing leaders can do in an organization is help the stakeholders come along with that team, or support the stakeholders in order to make their team's work and effort happen, or translate the company culture in order that the team is more successful. That's what leaders, the good leaders, as far as I can see and understand, do. And it's absolutely about leading by example. And any leader that I have come across now who doesn't want their team to suggest ways of working that are better, to ask for advice, or to ask for barriers to be broken down, that's a strange leader in this day and age, I think.
So we're very privileged to have David Marquet on the show, who wrote Turn the Ship Around. And I really, really loved reading the book and understanding his principle. At the end of the day, he doesn't make any decisions at all. The people who are in the front line are making the decisions, and they come and they would say, based on A, B, and C, we're going to do this, and fine, carry on. And then that was all that was required. However, first precursor, we always have more questions if we have time. I've got at least 4 other questions I wanted to ask you, but I'm going to go in a leadership kind of context.
Okay.
My old strapline used to be helping companies to build trust through transparency.
Huh.
And leaders having a really clear vision, mission, and purpose is really important. So teams going to know what and where and why they do. But when teams don't have that, when there are hidden agendas, when there is opaque decision making, when the team is screaming iceberg from the top of their lungs, and the captain is either asleep at the wheel or accelerating towards the edge of the cliff, how do teams best cope with that tension, that they know this is not the thing to be doing, but the command and control exists? And it's a difficult thing. It's a negative question to ask, but it's an important one because I know what happens.
Yeah, it absolutely happens, doesn't it? And, we have to be sympathetic to leaders to an extent. They might know something that they can't tell us. They might not know the answer and be embarrassed that they don't, so they're trying to hide it. They might have their eye on something else, personal or professional, that's really a worry, and they're not, and they don't have time for you. I guess the only thing I would say is the team needs to take responsibility to try and engage that leader to support them. I see too many teams who go, well, my leader is shocking, or my leader doesn't listen, or my leader doesn't care about our project. I'm afraid that's not acceptable. You can't use your leader's behavior as an excuse for your team not doing well. You have to keep pushing away at getting their support. And that might involve understanding more about what motivates your leader. So in the book, there's some tools about this, but doing a little bit of an analysis of the words they use, or the examples they like, or the things they tell you about, and then coming back in that language to tell them, if all they talk about is one of their bosses, their own bosses who they're trying to impress, great. Make everything about how this will impress their boss. You have to do a little bit of a job on making sure that you're supporting the leader so that they can support you. It is a sell up and it is a manage up. But, I do think in the same way that command and control is no longer possible in today's world, I also think, I've got a crap leader. Yes, it might be true, but it's no longer the end of the excuse. You still have to manage them. And even if you have to go into all sorts of different ways to do that, that is part of being a great team now, I believe.
I think I have a bit of one more follow-up to that last question. So, because that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, especially if now that we're having a couple of trends going around with more self-managing, some organizations that have very successfully implemented very self-managed teams. And you're saying, okay, you have to manage up, you have to sell. I mean, managing up, I get that. Selling up, I find a bit expecting a lot of energy from the team to actually do that, because essentially the team is actually quite close to, often closer to the customer and the reality than the leader. And as you rightly said, I think leaders are probably less in a position now to have all the information to make the right decisions, or at least some level, right? Because everything's become so complex. Services are so complex. Ecosystems are so complex. So it's totally understandable. So I think, it's rather non-excusable that a leader is embarrassed that they can't make a decision because it's pretty obvious that it's way too complex, these things. Can we actually maybe push back a bit more as teams to leaders? Because managing up is still sort of trying, oh, well, I will have to understand the leader before the leader understands us. But should we push that maybe a little bit harder? Is one point I think I would slightly have a different point of view to you, where I'm really saying that. Because I've just seen it too often where, why do we still have to do this? The teams are actually in a better position to make a better decision. Why is the leader not trusting the team? Why does the team still have to pitch back so hard? I find that expecting a lot of energy from the team, despite the fact that actually a lot of leverage is not on the team.
I understand. I don't think it's necessarily right, but I'm not sure what the alternative is. If you've got a leader who either refuses to engage and support or won't make a decision when a decision is needed, yes, you can try and go to their boss, but that doesn't always turn out well, right? You can try and talk to their peers and stakeholders, and maybe they hear something positive from someone else they respect rather than you. Short of kicking off a performance review of your own leader, there's lots of times. There's lots of times when you just don't have the power, right? So I think actually I think this speaks to an issue that I face a lot with some of my scientist-based clients and database clients, actually, as in people who are into data. So the proper chic geeks, I love the chic geeks of the data or the science world. These are people who know their stuff. More and more now, in a world that's got overwhelming information, lack of attention spans, more and more, every single person is having to find a powerful narrative that cuts through and just single-mindedly tells a leader or a customer or a peer what they need and why they need it. And so I would say that we still have to tell powerful stories which are motivating, whether that sounds like it's selling to your leader, whether that sounds like it's managing up to your leader. It is a business transferable skill that's becoming more necessary as we have so much information.
And on that note, before he goes into another question, I am really sorry, but we're going to have to wrap. This has been a really great interview. We've loved chatting with you, loved to have your insights, and we're sorry to have to cut it short.
Oh, thank you so much, Troy Marcus. It's been very good to meet you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.